Hi, everyone. I'm Abu Bakr. As Susanna mentioned, I'm one of the founders of Gradio. And Gradio is a tool for building machine learning demos. I'm going to be focusing this talk on kind of just a practical tutorial. So I have a few slides. We'll get through the slides, but then the bulk of this talk is actually going to be us writing code. So I hope everyone is ready to write some code. All right. So first of all, though, let me just talk about why machine learning demos are important. And I know to a certain extent, I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys all showed up for this talk because you guys are interested in machine learning demos. But machine learning demos are honestly, I think it's just so incredible. We live at a time, I think, where machine learning demos are becoming increasingly critical. They're like becoming critical to research, machine learning research, and machine learning in industry. Many of you guys might have seen Dolly Mini. Over the last few weeks. Dolly Mini has been going viral. One crazy fact is that 50 million images were generated by Dolly Mini users every single day since it launched. On average, 50 million images were generated by Dolly Mini every day. That to me is mind-blowing. And it represents a level of usage of machine learning that we've never really had before, right? And that's what I mean by when I say that I think we're at a critical point for machine learning demos. Historically, machine learning, state-of-the-art machine learning, was just accessible to researchers. And then thanks to a lot of great software tools, libraries like the transformer libraries, software engineers were able to access machine learning as well. And now with the rise of machine learning demos, anyone who can use a GUI or a browser can access or at least try out and kind of use machine learning, state-of-the-art machine learning stuff that was just published recently is now in the hands of millions of people. And so it's not just Dolly Mini. There's been other viral demos before it as well. Many of these demos were built with Gradio. And so in today's talk, what I'm going to be talking about is, first of all, like reasons you should build a machine learning demo. First of all, is accessibility, getting your models used, like I mentioned. Being able to understand kind of the limitations of your machine learning model. Sometimes when you build, when you look at kind of just the overall performance, you think your model is doing great, but when you dive into real samples, you understand where the model is not actually working, and demos can help with that. And the third reason is because it's really easy now to build a machine learning demo. It wasn't always easy, right? Historically, building a web demo for your machine learning model, it required you to know a lot of different technologies and a lot of different frameworks. You needed to know, hosting and containerization, all the way down to like front-end web development, HTML, JavaScript, CSS. And part of the reason why we created Gradio was to simplify this process. And now you can do all of this stuff entirely with Gradio and just entirely in Python, which is a language you already know if you're doing machine learning. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Before we jump into the actual practical part of this tutorial, are there any questions about the high level kind of motivation for demos or, why we're here today? If there are any questions in the chat, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you for linking to the repo, Susanna. I'm going to go ahead and open up the Colab then. So you guys should be able to see my screen here. And I'm also going to share this Colab with you guys, because what I would like is for everyone to open the Colab on their own and to go through the code, because that way you can actually start tweaking things and seeing how the code responds. So can you guys confirm that you're able to open up the Colab in the first place? You guys should see something like this. Okay, awesome. All right, thanks for confirming, Evan. Are other people able to open it up as well? Okay, great. I'll just give a second to make sure other people, the Colab loads for anybody. If anyone hasn't used a Colab notebook before, it's just text and code, and you can run any of the code cells by navigating to the code cell and pressing Control Enter. Okay, cool. It looks like everyone can open it up. So let's jump into it then. So what I'd like for you guys to do, first of all, is go ahead and install Gradio. So Gradio is just a Python package, so you can pip install it. You might see this warning here saying that I authored the Colab notebook. That's fine. You can go ahead and run it. It's safe. Pip install Gradio. And then we're onto the code. So so when it comes to building UIs and building demos, so Gradio tries to simplify the process very, very much. And it basically just requires 3 ingredients. The first ingredient is a function. Now, this can be any function. It's usually the prediction function of a machine learning model, but it can be literally any Python function. So in this case, we'll go ahead and define a very simplistic function here. This is kind of the hello world example of Gradio. So this is a function greet that just prepends bonjour before your name and exclamation mark after your name. That's kind of the first ingredient, your function. The second and third ingredients are what kind of input type you want and what kind of output type you want. And so in our case, our function, our 3 ingredients are the function. We want the input to be a text box and the output to be a text box, okay? Because for this function, it makes sense that you're entering text and you're outputting text. There are other values you could put here. You could say, I want an image instead, or I want an audio file instead. We'll see other examples shortly, but for this example, we want text. And then we have our class. So the core Gradio class is called Gradio.interface. This is the main class that you should know about. And it requires these 3 parameters, a function, input type, and output type. And that's it. Now I can go ahead and actually run this. If I go ahead and run this, what will happen is you'll see a little GUI that is created inside of this Colab notebook, okay? And now there's, let me see here, there's let me just put in someone's name, Evan. Let me just put in Evan's name. Evan is here today. If I just run this, it's gonna say bonjour, Evan. Okay, so it's very simple. All it's doing is literally just running the function that I have, but there's now this little GUI that's been created around it. Any questions around this like basic hello world example? Yeah, question from Ismail, can you replace the function with a Lambda function? Absolutely, you can. So literally any function can work. So let me just do that here. So let me just do lambda x equals, hello plus x. And I'll just rerun it. And you can try this yourself, of course. And you can try it here. Hello, ABC. Yep. Okay, so that's a very simple example. Let's, okay, so question, how can you render in Jupyter? Yeah, so this will work in Jupyter notebooks as well. So this works everywhere you run Python. So you just, if you were to copy and paste this code inside of a Jupyter notebook, you'll see the GUI showing up right there. Okay, and it's embedded. So basically, if your question is how does it work under the hood, what's happening is there's a server that gets spun up, and it's running locally on your server on a local host port, and that server gets embedded via an iframe inside of your Jupyter notebook or a Colab notebook. A standalone app, it's the same exact code, Ismail. Yeah. So literally, you can copy and paste this inside of a file, Python file. You can run it from an interpreter, and it'll just open up in your browser window. Or it'll show you the link that you can just at least open up in your browser window. Okay, great questions, everyone, already. And if you have more questions, just please keep them coming. Okay, so now I'm gonna show, like, let's maybe, to make this example a little bit more complex. So you might say, okay, well, this is fine, but what if I want to customize how this looks a little bit? Maybe I want the text box to be bigger. Maybe I want to include some placeholder text. So for that, all you have to do is you just, instead of using the string shortcut text box, I just use the class itself. So when you use the class itself, you can pass in properties that customize the look and feel of the app, look and feel of the demo. And so now here I have Gradio.textbox. I said I want 4 lines. So you can see here it's 4 lines. I have a placeholder, and I've even changed the label here to say your name. Okay. The function is still the same. So if I was going to put in the function name here, if I was to put in my name, you can see hello Abu Bakr here, because that's the function here. Okay. Good question from Ismail. Is there style sheet? Yes. So there's so I think there could be 2 different questions here. One is, how do you style things more? So again, you can use the parameters of the different things, but if you want to pass in your own CSS, you can do that as well. So you can pass it. So the interface class takes in a CSS parameter where you can either define CSS as a string. You can say, I want, whatever element to have certain thing, text, I don't know, input to look a certain way, or you can pass in even your own CSS files. Is it possible to integrate HTML code? You guys are asking fantastic questions. I think so. It depends what you mean. But let's say you have a certain output you want to show that's not one of our supported components. So let me show you guys what the supported components are, because in a lot of cases, you don't need to write your own HTML whatsoever. So if you go on gradio.app/docs, so I'll send the link here in the chat as well. On the left side, you'll see all of the different components that we support. So everything from text boxes to drop downs to images to videos to files to data frames. But we also support the chatbots, Model 3Ds, but we also support HTML. And this can be used to kind of display arbitrary HTML output. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so just kind of going back here. I'll show more examples and then we can, hopefully that will kind of address some of the questions. But again, if you have more questions, that's completely fine. Please keep them coming. Okay, so we've seen text boxes, but text boxes are kind of boring. So let's kind of see another example. This here is an image function. What it does is it takes an image as a NumPy array and it multiplies it with a sepia filter matrix. And so we can go ahead and run this. Now my function is this sepia function. The inputs this time are image and the outputs are also image. And so when I run this code, you'll see that kind of, this interface has been created here. And now I can put in my own image. Let me put an image of myself. I know, kind of vain, but okay. So I put this in and you can see that this has taken my image. It has applied the default pre-processing to convert that image into a NumPy array. And then it does all of the NumPy array stuff and does the post-processing to take that NumPy array back and output as an image. Okay, so Gradio kind of handles all of the pre-processing that you need for these complex types. Now, what if you don't want it to be converted to a NumPy array? What if you want it to be converted to a pill image or something like that? Then you can just change the type of the image. You can say, I want it to be a type pill or something like that. And you can see all of these parameters inside of the image component, and I can take in different types, which change the pre-processing involved, and various different parameters to control the pre-processing. Okay, questions about that? Now, this might be a good time to mention that you guys might see this like running on a public URL. So what does this mean? So what is happening here is that when you run Gradio on a Colab notebook, or when you run it locally, but you set share equals true. So if you set this parameter share equals true, what happens is that a public URL to your demo gets created. Okay, a public URL to your demo gets created. And then you can actually take that URL and send it to anybody. So I'm going to put it inside this chat here. And what is happening here is that now it's like a Google Drive link. You can literally send it to anyone around the world, and they can try out your machine learning model or whatever demo that you've built here. And they don't need to download any software. They don't need to have any sort of specialized hardware or anything like that, because the demo continues running on whatever machine your Gradio code is running. Okay, so it's not like I've deployed the code anywhere. It continues to run locally, but the link is available publicly. Okay, so then anyone can try out the model, and you can try it out right now. You can click on this link that I put in the chat, and you can put this in. Someone can try it out with their own images or their own whatever data it is, and try out the model. Okay. All right. So a couple of questions here. So from Ismail, is it just the serving? Yeah. So what happens is you can think of it this way: the model runs locally, but the UI gets deployed in some sense. And so Gradio handles the message passing from the UI back to the machine where your function is running, where your model is running, and then takes the output and sends it back to the browser so that the person can see it on the other end. Yes, so, and then what happens when you kill the app? Then when you kill the app, of course, then the demo will go down. So if you need a persistent, so this is more for just like quick prototyping if I want to send a link to somebody. But if you need a persistent link, we'll talk about that afterwards. You can do that with Hugging Face Spaces. So a couple more questions here from Cristobal. Is it possible to embed? Yeah. So yes, absolutely. So you can embed Gradio demos via iframes. We also have our own embedded native embedding as well. Let me come back to this question, Cristobal, because it makes more sense to embed things once you have it permanently hosted on Hugging Face Spaces. So I'll show how to host on Hugging Face Spaces, and then I'll show how to embed it. Does that sound good? Awesome. Okay, so question from Seagate. Can we host a Gradio server? Yeah, 100%. So typically that's how people use it, is that they'll do it on their own private machines. So I'm showing you on a Colab notebook, but you can run this locally, and that's fine. And when you run it locally, there are absolutely no limitations. And then you can always just do like SSH forwarding, and send the link to whoever you want, or you can do it in AWS. That's a very, very common use case. People will open up a port on AWS and just let people use it. And then it's completely open source, completely free. You can use it for however long you want. If you use the share equals true thing, where we're kind of hosting it for, not hosting it, but we've created the tunneling link for you, then it lasts for 72 hours. So if you want permanent things, either host it yourself or use Hugging Face Spaces, which we'll talk about towards the end. Cool. All right. Thanks for the great questions, everyone. Keep them coming. Okay, so now that we've seen kind of the basic uses of Gradio.interface, I should mention some other cool parameters that you might be interested in. So the interface class has a lot more parameters that you can use to customize the look and the feel of your app. So for example, you might want to add a title, which adds a little title to the top of your UI. You can add a description underneath the title, and you can put some markdown or HTML there. You can also add examples. Now, this is a really, really important one. Like we've seen that if you really want your machine learning demos to be used, you should pass in examples. So for example, for an image classification model, you might want to pass in some example inputs, some example images, because that way people don't have to search their computer to find something. They can literally click on one of the examples and see how to use your model. Inputs and outputs also can accept a list of input types. So let's say your function accepts more than one parameter, like the function here, calculator. Then you can also pass in a list of input types. So that's probably easiest to show with an example. So let me show this next example here that utilizes a lot of these parameters here. So you'll see here that this demo here, let me go down. Yeah, so this demo here, it has a title called calculator, test calculator. It has some description here, which is written in Markdown. Where is it? Oh yeah, look, there's Markdown here. And here I have 3 different inputs. Okay, I have a Gradio.number that is initially its value is at 4. Then I have a radio buttons, add, subtract, multiply, divide, and then I have another number. Okay, so you can see that here. Okay, so 44, subtract 20, I run this, and the answer is 24. Okay, and what's cool is I have examples. So examples are usually passed it as a nested list. And the nested list here is, each of the kind of internal elements of that list each of these is like one sample. So 5 add 3 is one sample, and then this list gets passed as 5 goes to number, add goes to the radio choice, 3 goes to the number. And now you have this. So Ismail, yes. So I presume you can customize the layout. Yeah, so definitely. The interface class also accepts an element, a parameter called layout, I believe. Yeah, so no, what is it called? I have to check, but there's a parameter here that allows you to set it up horizontally like this or vertically. But if you want more control over the layout, we're actually going to talk about something called Gradio Blocks, which is a very new thing in Gradio. Maybe you haven't seen it before, which gives you a lot more control over the layout. So I'll talk about that towards the very end of the talk. Any other questions? These are great questions. Thanks. Okay, sorry, I muted myself for a moment. So good question. If I run a Gradio app locally, does it automatically download the weights of the DL model locally? So yeah, so basically, I think to answer your question, and no, definitely feel free to ask more questions. So let's take a quick example of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Gradio website just so I can pull up an example. So the Gradio website has a lot of different guides as well, by the way. So if you're doing a common use case, you can take a look at this. I'm going to download, let's do, which one should we do? Let's do image classification in PyTorch. Okay, I'm just going to pick this example for now. I'm going to, yeah, so, okay. So let's just take a look at this code here. Okay, I think that'll be easier than running everything right now. So when you have, let's say you have some PyTorch code here. So you have some PyTorch code, you're loading a model. You just write your code like you would normally, right? So I've loaded the model here, I have this model. Then you just have to write a prediction function. And in your prediction function, you can use anything that you've written before the prediction function. So you kind of write, the way it works with Gradio is just write all your code. It runs once. Okay, so everything just goes through. And then your prediction function can utilize any of the variables or anything that you've loaded ahead of time. So in this case, I use model, which I've loaded ahead of time. And then in the actual Gradio interface, all I have to do is I have to pass this predict function. Okay, so then it can utilize the weights of the model that has been used before. So does that answer your question, Volti? And then you have this little nice demo that's running here. I can pass in examples. I can do this. Okay, yeah, so great question by Indica. I didn't talk too much about this, but you can absolutely. So one big use case that we see all the time is people using Gradio so you use Gradio to, sorry, actually, let me clarify something with Ulti before I go to your question, Indica. So it is all on the cloud. No, so Ulti, no, actually, you don't have to use Gradio while even connected to the internet. You can actually run it completely locally, right? So you can use it completely locally. You can download the weights ahead of time, and you can use it locally. So I hope I was clear in my answer. If not, feel free to ask follow-up questions. So yeah, okay. So Indica, back to your question. Yeah, so one very common use case is people using Gradio to deploy a model or share a model with other people, and then get feedback on if the model is performing kind of badly on certain samples. You try to collect those samples, and those samples are particularly valuable because that's where the model is making a mistake. And so if you can collect those samples and you can retrain on that, you can improve the model's performance. And so the way you do that, Gradio makes that super simple. You don't have to worry about creating a database or anything like that. Literally all the user has to do is press the flag button. And when a person presses the flag button, what happens is that on the machine where Gradio is running, there's this directory that is created called flagged. And there's a log file that is created as well. And this log file kind of stores the data that is coming in for that particular image. And for that particular sample or whatever it may be. And so you can see here, there's some data that's been stored for that particular image and so on. And if it's an image, the data should get saved in a certain way. If it's a text, it'll get saved in a certain way. But basically, it gets saved to a local log file that you can use, and you can do whatever you want with that data. Okay, so hopefully that answered your question, Indica. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to keep going forward. I want to mention a couple of cool integrations between Hugging Face and Gradio. So many of you guys have probably used Hugging Face's stuff before. Maybe you've used the Hugging Face Model Hub. If you have not used the Hugging Face Model Hub, it's really cool. You should check it out. You can get more than at this point, I think it's more than 50,000 models, a crazy number of models you can find on the Hugging Face Hub. And let's say you find a cool model that you like. Okay, so let's say I find this one here. So this here is a text-to-speech model on the Hugging Face Hub. And I want to build a Gradio demo from that model, okay? So all I have to do is I have to just type in gradio.interface.load. So this is a special class method. You put in the word Hugging Face, and then you put in the name of the model on the hub. And you can put in pretty much any of the models on the hub here. And then you just do launch. And what this does is that this creates a demo just off the, you don't have, it automatically figures out what is the right input and what is the right output for this particular model. And now I can start using it. So let me put in some text here. And this is a text to speech model. So hopefully if everything is working right, then this will create a, an audio file. Okay, cool.
Test.
Okay, this took a little while, maybe because the model was warming up, but let's try this. I am teaching Gradio. Cool, this was much faster.
I am teaching Gradio.
Okay, cool, not bad, right? So you can try out these models, and what you can do is you can even customize these demos. So maybe you want to change how it looks a little bit. So you can pass in your own title, you can pass in your own description, you can even pass in your own model, your own examples. So this is GPT-J, which is kind of an open source version of GPT-3. So you can pass in things and you can see how it completes the model. The moon's orbit around the Earth I put in as the input, and then it completes it itself. Looks like it's using Wikipedia to complete it. There once was a pineapple. Let's see here. There once was a pineapple plantation in Central America. Okay, it kind of completes it that way. So question from Ismail here, can we pre-download the models? Yes, you can absolutely do that. So this is using the API link, the inference API. So this is kind of using that, but you can also, let me go to the Gradio doc. You can also download the models ahead of time and pass in the models as a pipeline to the Gradio interface. So we have this special function called from pipeline, and it loads the model from a local pipeline. So you can see here, I've downloaded a transformers model for image classification locally. So this is local. And then I've created a Gradio demo from that pipeline. Yeah. Cool. All right. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is kind of the other way. So let's say you have a Gradio demo and now you want to host it somewhere. You want to have a permanent link for it. So several people asked about this earlier. So the good news is you can download models, you can host models completely for free on Hugging Face Spaces. So this is the part of the tutorial where I'm going to get every single person here to create a Hugging Face space. So get ready so make sure you're following along here, and you're all going to write some code here. So as a first step, what you have to do is you have to create a Hugging Face account. So if anyone here does not have a Hugging Face account, just go ahead and just go to huggingface.co. So the link is right there on the Colab notebook, and it's going to ask you. I think you can sign out or something, and you can log in, and you can press the sign up button. So if you don't already have an account, go ahead and sign up. If you do have an account, go ahead and sign in. So I'll go ahead and do that myself here. The next step is once you are logged in, click on your profile picture and click on new space. So I'm going to click on my profile picture and I'm going to click on new space. Okay, so you guys see that here. And then then I'll kind of show you what's happening next. So basically the way it works is, so let me actually pause for a minute and give everyone a chance to complete this. So let me know when you have created your account and you are at this stage here, clicking on create a new space. Okay, cool, awesome. Wait for a couple more people. Okay. All right, awesome. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're going to give our space a name. So this is just kind of name of your demo. And then we'll go ahead and actually upload the code for the space. So let's give our name, let's give our space a name, and you can give it whatever you want. For me, I'm going to create this calculator demo. You can pick a different one too. So I'm just going to call it calc demo. Okay. If you want to try like creating your own demo, or maybe you want to use the sepia filter code, whatever one you want, it doesn't matter. It's up to you. You can give it a name based off of that. If you want, you can give it a license. I'll just give it the MIT license. And then you pick Gradio because we're creating a Gradio demo. And then we'll go ahead and you can either make it public or private. Both of them are free. In my case, I'm just going to go ahead and create a public demo. All right. So now we get to this stage here. So this is basically what's happening is that Hugging Face spaces under the hood, they're just Git repos. They're just Git repos. So you can clone this repo, you can add your files there, and then you can push them. But in our case, because we're just going to make a very, very simple demo, it's probably easier just to create the app file right in the browser. So you can click on that link. I don't know if everyone saw that. If you go down here, hint, create the app.py file right in your browser. So click create. And then you should get to this stage here. You should get to the calc demo. This, in my case, is called calc demo. You can call it something else. But you get to this place where you have your editor here. And here you can write in your code for your Gradio demo. Okay, so you can import Gradio as gr and so on and kind of write your code. I'm just going to copy and paste this calculator code from the Colab notebook. Again, oops, I don't need this. Move this. Yeah. Again, you could put in your own code. You could. It doesn't have to be this example. You can do whatever you want here. But the point is you create a Gradio.interface and you go ahead and launch it. And then you do commit new file at the very bottom. So when you do commit new file, something cool happens. Okay, so Spaces takes the code that you have written and tries to actually launch it as an app. So you can see building over here, which says building on the top right. So yours will say that as well. And then shortly, if everything worked well, this building should change to, let's give it a minute. Well, maybe I need to refresh the page. Let me refresh the page. Oh yeah, okay, change to running. Awesome. So now my app is actually running. So if I click on app, you'll see that the same exact demo is now available as a space, as kind of a demo that's hosted on Hugging Face Spaces. Were you guys able to do that as well? And now the cool thing is I can share this link with you guys, and I encourage you guys to share your links here as well. And we can all try out each other's demos and use them for whatever kind of we want. Right, cool. Okay, so people are, yep, great. So it looks like it worked for everyone. Can you control the number of submitted requests? Interesting. What do you mean by that, Federico? Can you elaborate on your question a little bit? What are you trying to control exactly? All of this is hosted on Hugging Face's server, so you don't have to worry about kind of, you don't have to pay for anything or anything like that. So cool. So now what I want to mention is one question that was asked earlier about embedding, right? So now that you have your own link, your own space, you can right click here. I don't know if you guys can see the menu that's popped up on my screen. I hope you guys can. But basically, you'll see here, Chris, mind blown. Okay, great. So you can see here, you can actually look, this is an iframe. And so what I can do is I can literally just copy the link to the iframe. I'm just copying that. And now I can, if I want, I can embed this on my personal blog. I can embed this on my portfolio page. You can build a nice portfolio of machine learning demos that you've done. Or you can even embed it in a Jupyter notebook if you want for any reason. So if you go down, I have an example. Where is it? Oh yeah, so I have an example here where I frame a space that I built before. So this is a different space, but this is a space that you can use to play Pictionary and it'll kind of guess. So you can use that to embed stuff. You can embed your own spaces or your own demos as well. So cool. Any questions about Hugging Face Spaces or Gradio or anything I've said so far? Okay, in the demo UI, I think some bot can submit a lot of tests. This should be expensive. Yeah, so I think do some sort of rate limiting on spaces. So I don't know the details, but I think if there's too many requests that come from one IP address, it'll probably rate limited or something like that. But don't worry about it. Hugging Face is happy to host demos. Cool. Yeah, exactly. Part of the we've heard that a lot, and we've ourselves have tried out Plotly Dash, and it's great, but hopefully you'll find this is a lot easier to use. What about security? Okay, great. So good question about security. So let's say you want your demo so first of all, you don't have to share your demo, right? You can always keep it low. So I guess security could mean two different things. One is you don't want other people to try out your demo. Maybe you have some private code. And so you can always run it locally. If you do want to share it with other people, then you can also add authentication. So I think it's a little bit beyond the scope of this conversation, but if you are interested in authentication, you can simply pass in one parameter. You can see that here, where you just pass in one parameter into your launch function, and then you can give it a username and a password if you want. And then people have to supply that username and password even to just access your GUI. So that's what you could mean. The other thing you could mean is about security is what if someone is running some malicious stuff on Spaces? We have some security scanners to make sure that if we detect anything, we can kind of do that. We can kind of remove those spaces if anybody's trying to do anything malicious. Evan, great question, not cheeky at all. Advantages of Gradio over Streamlit. Streamlit is also a great library. We think Gradio is a lot easier to use, especially for this use case of building machine learning demos. All you have to do is give it a function, inputs and outputs, and then you have a fully fledged, a GUI. The other kind of advantage is that Gradio runs everywhere. So it'll run perfectly fine inside a Jupyter notebook or a Colab notebook because it uses the default Python runtime, whereas Streamlit, it has its own kind of runtime, and so interpreter and all of that stuff. So I think those are certain reasons why you might want to use Gradio over Streamlit. One advantage that Streamlit did have over Gradio is if you had more complex UIs, like if you wanted to rearrange things, different layouts and things like that. But as I'll talk about with Gradio, now we've introduced something called Gradio Blocks. And Blocks gives you a lot of that power in this kind of Streamlit-like way to kind of do whatever you want, arrange functions and stuff however you want. So that'll be kind of the last thing that I talk about. Hope that answers your questions, Ismail and Evan. Okay. So, all right. So the last thing that I want to mention, and I want to be cognizant of time as well. So maybe I'll take 5 more minutes just to quickly introduce blocks, and then I'll probably end in my part. And then if there's any last questions, I'm happy to answer them. So, okay, so blocks, I won't get a chance to go through everything here, but I'll just like to introduce you to blocks. So as you guys have seen, the interface class is pretty easy to use, but in some cases, it might not be sufficiently flexible for what you need. So let's say you want to group together multiple related demos as like tabs in one web app, or you want to change the layout of your demo instead of having just all of the inputs on the left and outputs on the right. Or you want to have multi-step interfaces. Let's say you have like a text, you have like a speech to text and like text to sentiment classification. So for things like that, or let's say you want to change like component properties and things like that. So anyway, so we have a lot. If you want to have, basically, if you want more flexibility, you should check out the Blocks API. I'll just show an example. I'll just jump into a quick example. This is kind of a hello world for blocks. So what you'll notice is that there's some similarities to interface. So for example, you do define your own functions. Then you create this blocks context. So this is the part that's different. So you say something like this: with Gradio.blocks as demo, you have a markdown. So you create this blocks context, and then inside here you can instantiate whatever components you want. So here I've instantiated a markdown component, so I can write whatever markdown I want. Then I've instantiated a Gradio.text box and another Gradio.text box. This one is like the input text box. This is the output text box. And then I assign events. So I say that for my input, if this input changes, I want the greet function to run. and that the greet function should take as input the value of this text box, and it should take its output and it should assign it to this other text box. Okay, so let's just see it in action. That might be the easiest way. So again, let me just let's see here, Ismail. So welcome to Gradio, Ismail here. Okay, now what's happening here is like you guys have can kind of infer here. I have like full control over all of the components and all of the events that I want to use for these different components. So this gives me a lot of flexibility over how I do things. Now, a couple of points I want to make here is, a couple of things here is now with blocks, you can kind of control over, you can have a lot more control over where the components show up. You can have more control over what events cause what other functions to get triggered. So there's a lot more level of detail here. I'm not going to go over all of this stuff, but if you guys are interested in this level of flexibility, definitely check out these other examples I have here. So this is an example where I control the layout. So I have tabs and I have things assigned in a row. So I'm just going to run that so you guys can see what that looks like. So this is an example where I have two different demos here. I have one that flips text, and then I have a separate one here that flips images. So I can put in, I don't know, this image here, I flip it. Okay, the image gets flipped and things like that. You can also do things like updating properties. And so what that means is you don't simply have to just update the value of a component, you can also update the properties of a component. So for example, this one here, based on this radio button, I change if it's a small text box, a big text box, or no text box. So things like that. Again, unfortunately, I didn't have time to kind of go through all of these examples in detail, but you guys have the Colab notebook on hand now, so definitely check out these examples if you have more time. And now there are a bunch of great questions. So before I jump into answering those questions, let me go back to the slides as well, just so you guys have, in case I don't get to answer everything. I just want to mention a couple of things. One is I really encourage you guys to bookmark the repo. So if you go on gradio.dev here, it takes you straight to the GitHub repo. So definitely check that out. If you like this tutorial, give it a star. We'd really appreciate it. And then if you have follow-up questions as you're trying to try out the library, you can find me on Twitter and I'm happy to answer questions. So with that, thank you very much. And let me try to answer the remaining questions that are here. So what about the state change? Can we update it per key? Sorry, Ismail, I'm not sure if I completely follow that question. What do you mean by the state change? Yeah. So basically what's happening in this example, I think you're referring to the example that I showed with this one here. So with this one here, because I said input.change, so anytime this text box, the input text box changes, and every time I press a key, the function gets rerun. So this might not always be optimal for your use case. So maybe what you want instead is you want a button. So button equals gradio.button. And then maybe you say instead button.click. This should only run every time you click the button, and the button can have a name that says something like click me. And if I was to rerun this, now the button will just show up underneath the text box. So hopefully it'll work. Yeah, so now you see this. So now if I type in your name here, Ismail, so now you see it's not running. It waits until this is actually clicked. Does that make sense? Hopefully I answered your question there, but feel free to ask a follow-up. Jay, can there be interactions between multiple Gradio blocks for state change? So you can definitely have interactions between multiple demos. So like, I think if I understand what you're saying, so for example, this one, there's multiple demos happening here, and you can have interactions between them. But what kind of interactions are you looking for? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. How is CSS specified with CSS Gradio blocks? Yeah, same as before. So the blocks class can also take in CSS. So if this can accept a CSS parameter, and you can pass in a string of CSS or a CSS file. Oh, okay. So great question from Ismail. So can you customize the state change? Let's say every third word or something. Not at the moment. We don't support that, but I guess what you could do is in your function, you can do whatever you want. So if you don't want it to do any, so let's say your function takes a long time to run, you can store, okay, so you can store state. This is a little bit beyond this tutorial, but you can kind of store state as well. And you can say, okay, if it hasn't changed, like if there's only been 2 new words, then don't run the function. But if there's been a third word, then you can go ahead and run the function. So you can basically wrap all of that logic inside the function to run when the event is called. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Gradio for getting a demo mobile app. Great question, Burhan. So by default, Gradio interfaces are responsive. So they are fully responsive. So if you were to open this up in a mobile app or any of these demos up, it should, look nice and look pretty, but it's not a mobile app. It's still a web app, running in the browser. But there are a lot of things that do change. So for example, the image component, instead of accepting an image like a drag and drop image, it'll actually work like you can click on it and take a picture from your phone. So a lot of things just natively work out of the box. And so we felt so far that we hadn't needed to create like a fully functioning, mobile app or anything like that. You can just actually literally just open it up in your browser on your phone and everything will just adjust and it'll be responsive. So hopefully that should work for you. If it doesn't, feel free to file an issue in the repo and we can take a look at that. Awesome. Okay, I think my time is wrapping up. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for attending the talk and particularly for asking the great questions. I mean, you guys are amazing. Great questions and really appreciate you guys coming.